Teaching your dog to do a Nazi salute by watching freely and legally available videos on YouTube is a jailable offense in the Orwellian sub-kingdom of Scotland. A Harvard study just revealed that the water is wet and that the cathedral media is heavily biased against Donald Trump. Apparently, lesbianism is the fault of men. It's hard to find something that is not the fault of men these days, really. In other news, virtual reality porn is rape, because the high priests of the religious left, the researchers, say so. Therefore, it must be true. Telling women not to drink while pregnant is sexist, and finally, the British Brainwash Corporation just threatened to tell your boss if you are part of the 90% of the people who are to the right politically of the BBC. These are our stories on Periodic Insanity. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 9 of Periodic Insanity. Now I know I've been publishing a bit rare in the last few weeks, but this is because my schedule has gotten insanely crowded as I try to do more things than I usually do, so I can then leave everything in order and dedicate most of the month of June to the trip to Sweden. I'm looking forward to that, and thanks to all of you who donated for that endeavor, as well as thanks in advance for those of you who will donate for the project in the remaining weeks until I take off to Sweden. Anyway, let's dive straight into the news so we can keep this episode in the acceptable format of 45 minutes at the most. First one, coming from Heat Street. Scottish YouTuber faces a year in prison for teaching Nazi trick to girlfriend's dog. It's a very long article, so I won't be reading it in its entirety. Quote, a year ago, Scottish YouTube comedian Marcus Meechan, aka Count Dankula, uploaded a video to YouTube of himself teaching his girlfriend's dog to be a Nazi. The conceit of the video was to play a prank on his girlfriend by having her pug, Buddha, learn to do tricks to the sound of offensive Nazi slogans such as Gas the Jews and Sieg Heil. The video went viral, receiving millions of views and landing on the front page of Reddit. Most people laughed at the joke and did not interpret it as supportive of Nazi values, but the Scottish police were not amused. A month after Meechan posted the video, police arrived at his door and threw him in jail for the night. He will appear before a judge on Monday, facing a hate crime charge with a maximum sentence of 1 year in prison. He also lost multiple jobs as a result of the video. Meechan could become the first Scottish comedian to be jailed for a joke. I think everything can and should be joked about, Meechan told Heat Street over the phone. I'm still trying to find the humor in it. Laughter just makes it easier to deal with. Meechan said he fears the judge will try to make an example of him because of the amount of the attention the case drew from the British press. His trial would have no jury and his sentencing is entirely up to the judge's discretion. I've seen this happen before when people get dragged through the media, he said. The judge says, let's completely fuck up this one person's life so no one does it again. Meechan's situation closely mirrors the recent anti-Semitism controversy with the YouTuber PewDiePie. PewDiePie made a similar style joke using an anti-Semitic phrase as shock humor to make a different comedic point. Interesting enough, PewDiePie was based in London when he made the joke, but was not charged with the crime despite living under similar United Kingdom hate crime laws. Scotland is so horrifically PC, Meechan said. If you have a hate crime charge, most companies won't hire you. Despite Scotland's absurdly strict hate crime laws, major Scottish comedians are not given the same treatment as small-time YouTubers. The group leading the charge against Meechan is the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities. At the time of his arrest in 2016, the group called the video outrageous and dismissed the idea it could possibly be taken as a joke. Heat Street reached out to the council and asked if they believe Meechan deserved jail time for the video, but they declined to comment. In a recent video, Meechan explained that many Jewish fans from outside Scotland had reached out to him and asked to write letters vouching for that Meechan is not an anti-Semite, but unfortunately only the opinion of Scottish Jews could be submitted used in court. And then there go on with the article quoting on Skeptor, which is also a subscriber to this channel, and that he has generally gotten public support, blah blah blah, and then, quote, however, one time he said his alcoholic neighbor called him a Nazi bastard and threw a bin of dog shit at his door. In an ironic twist and further proof of the Orwellian nightmare that is Scotland, when police arrived, they arrest his neighbor not for throwing dog shit at his door, a crime she admitted to, but for hate crime because she called him a Nazi bastard. If the trial goes badly, Meechan has considered applying for asylum in the United States. In March, the United States granted asylum to a Singaporean YouTuber who was thrown in jail for a video where he humped the Quran. Meechan figures he may have a shot at a similar deal. I don't want to live in a dystopia with gulags full of people arrested for wrong thing, Meechan said. I know that sounds extreme, but we are on that path. No opinion should be banned or illegal. Meechan is still together with his girlfriend Sue through the controversy and media attention, and their pug, Buddha, is still a raging anti-Semite. Alright, let us take a look at an excerpt from this allegedly horrifying material that could land this dude in jail. Seriously, let's take a look.
You want to gas the juice? Do you want to gas the juice? Come on, gas the juice. Come on, gas the juice, son. Come on. Do you want to gas the juice? Do you want to gas the juice? Do you want to gas the juice? Gas the juice. Juice.
Ausgekehlt wurde von dem leichten Zeug, das sie für einzufinden begann. Heute müssen wir selbst...
Sieg heil! Sieg heil! Sieg heil! Sieg heil! Gas the Jews. Gas the Jews. Sieg heil! Sieg heil! Sieg heil! Sieg heil! Gas the Jews. Gas the Jews. I'm not racist, by the way. I just really wanted to piss her off. Jews.
Seriously? For this? I mean, I don't like dogs, nor do I like Nazis, but this was still funny. I mean, holy shit, really? Jail for this? But maybe I shouldn't be surprised. Scotland is the place that wanted to place a state guardian for all children because parents can't be trusted. So why would I be surprised that they also have an out-of-control police state acting on extremely retarded laws? Scotland is also the place that has the police warning people on Twitter to self-censor and that arrests old men for noticing that there's too many Muslim immigrants. Maybe he should file for asylum in the United States right now. Seriously, Meechan, if you're watching this, file for asylum now. Why wait for the trial? The simple fact that the trial is happening should be grounds enough to get the hell out of there. I mean, even from the statist position that some opinions are so beyond the pale that they have to be restricted, even from that position, this case makes no sense whatsoever. It's a joke. Get the fuck over it. And here I would reference you all back to my older video, The Jewish Lobby is Mental and Useless. The Scottish Council of Jewish Communities is just as retarded as many other Jewish organizations who, in the end, harm Jews a lot more than they help. This is how you create actual anti-Semites, by acting like an offended bitch at every joke and attempting to use state violence because you're offended. If the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities really had the best intention of the said Jewish communities in mind, it would use its time to lead charges against the cultural enrichment that has been brought in all over Scotland. You know, the adherents to the religion of special needs, by far the most anti-Semitic group anywhere in Europe. That's why I despise most of these organizations, because they are a harm and a hindrance to the Jewry and end up being the best allies of legit anti-Semites. I would go as far as to say that almost half of the non-Muslim Jew haters would not exist had it not been for these extreme actions taken at the behest of these types of organizations. These types of organizations go after dudes who put a merchant on their debit card, or this guy who cracks a joke with his dog. This is insanity. You should be able to joke about everything. And I don't give a shit if it offends anyone, nor do I care whether the joke is in good taste or not. Freedom of speech means precisely protecting the most unpopular things. Because, you know, for the popular things, freedom of speech protections aren't necessary. Precisely because those things are popular. It's the outliers that need those protections. And the comedians are the outliers. They're the canary in the coal mine of the free speech issue. Once you gas the jokes, that's when you know your country is in trouble. I mean, just saying. Alright. Let's move to the next story. Also from Heat Street. Harvard study reveals huge extent of anti-Trump media bias. A major new study out of Harvard University has revealed the true extent of the mainstream media's bias against Donald Trump. Academics at the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics and Public Policy analyzed coverage from Trump's first 100 days in office across 10 major TV and print outlets. They found that the tone of some outlets was negative in as many as 98% of reports, significantly more hostile than the first 100 days of the 3 previous administrations. The academics based their study on 7 US outlets and 3 European ones. In America, they analyzed CNN, NBC, CBS, Fox News, the New York Times, a former newspaper, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. They also took into account the BBC, the UK's Financial Times, and the German public broadcaster ARD. Every outlet was negative more often than positive. Only Fox News, which features some of Trump's most enthusiastic supporters and is often given special access to the president, even came close to positivity. Fox was ranked 52% negative and 48% positive. The study also divided news items across topics. On immigration, healthcare, and Russia, more than 85% of reports were negative. On the economy, the proportion was more balanced, 54% negative to 46% positive. The study highlighted one exception. Trump got overwhelmingly positive coverage for launching a cruise missile attack on Syria. Around 80% of all reports were positive on that. The picture was very different for other recent administrations. The study found that President Obama's first 100 days got a good write-up overall, with 59% of reports positive. Bill Clinton and George W. Bush got overall negative coverage, it found, but to a much lesser extent than Trump. Clinton's first 100 days got 40% positivity, while Bush's got 43%. Trump has repeatedly claimed that his treatment by the media is unprecedented in its hostility. This study suggests that, at least when it comes to recent history, he is correct. Gee, you think? Now, the detractors might say that the fact that the coverage is negative is not in itself indicative of media bias. After all, a tornado or an earthquake also get overwhelmingly negative reporting, yet that doesn't mean the media is biased against tornadoes. I've seen this argument being made in the comment section. Well, first of all, yes, the media is biased against tornadoes. It's just that a tornado is universally recognized as a bad thing to happen to an area. It's not the same thing with Donald Trump, though, isn't it? I mean, first of all, Donald Trump is a human being, and I know that's hard for leftists to acknowledge, but, you know, give it a try. And I'm not joking. Just take a look at the leftist media rallying against anyone for humanizing Donald Trump. That's their terminology. These people are demented. Many of them should not be allowed outside a psychiatric facility. But anyway, that's besides the point. So as I was saying, first of all, Donald Trump is a human being. Secondly, several tens of millions of Americans and at least another 100 million people in Europe believe that Donald Trump is great. Or at the very least, not obviously negative, like it would be the case with a tornado. Yet the media coverage doesn't reflect that at all. Even Fox News has more negative coverage of him more often than not. So at best, this study can be accused of not digging even more into the causes of the bias. But it's easy to infer from the table that breaks things down by topic. 96% negative on immigration? How is that? In what world is that reflective of the general opinion? Even people who did not vote for him, and even some of his opponents, agree with him on immigration. That percentage alone is indicative of not just bias, but bubble-fueled bias. The overwhelming majority of journalists in the cathedral media, and definitely in the outlets surveyed, have literally no idea what they're reporting on. The same can be said on the topic of Russia. The Trump administration has done the boldest moves on Russia and is a breath of fresh air for those of us who actually take the Russian threat seriously and have been for years. But that's rarely, if ever, reported in the cathedral. What we hear in the cathedral is petty rumors, and that's at best. Andrew Klavan over at the Daily Wire described it best.
Anonymous sources close to the Trump administration have been telling major media outlets that they are close to the Trump administration but wish to remain anonymous. The sources tell journalists that sources in the FBI are telling journalists that they are in the know about investigations of the Trump administration that anonymous sources close to the administration are telling journalists they are in the know about.
That's really how most of the cathedral media coverage on this sounds like to normal people. Because that's exactly what it is. Also, let's not forget who sits on the contributing boards in some of these outlets. The Washington Post, for instance, pays John Podesta to write for them about Trump. John fucking Podesta. Is it any surprise that 83% of the coverage of Trump by the Washington Post is negative? Imagine CNN having a show about President Hillary Clinton produced by Kellyanne Conway. Would that be objective? Of course not. But unlike leftists, conservatives have no problem admitting their bias up front. And this has got to change. This assumption that hardline leftists and sometimes outright communists are somehow neutral, this assumption needs to go. They are not neutral. They are people just like everyone else, somewhere on the political spectrum, far left in their case, and thus with political biases just like everyone else. You're not superhuman, leftists. So yeah. The study in itself may not be fully indicative of bias, but when you factor in who writes the stories, who selects the stories, and compare the results to the general public, the bias becomes self-evident. Even for those who hate Trump and believe the bias is inherently good. Remember, the study is not discussing whether the bias is appropriate or not, or warranted or not, but whether if it exists or not, and how it compares to previous administrations. And that much is settled. This bias is huge and unprecedented in the last 25 years. Alright, next story, coming from Pink News, a place of cancer where I go so you don't have to. Homosexual behavior in women only developed because of men, controversial new scientific study claims. And goes like this, quote, "Same-sex attraction in women developed because men get turned on by it," the controversial new scientific study has argued. The paper tried to determine the evolutionary origins of lesbianism, arguing that it may have developed because of men's excitement and the thought of women being attracted to one another. The Cypriot researchers from the University of Nicosia surveyed a total of 1,509 heterosexual participants for their study. Lead researcher Menelaos Apostolou' hypothesis has naturally attracted plenty of skepticism, with many arguing that the theories are outlandish and not supported by the evidence gathered, but he defended his theories in conversation with Pink News. Quote, "My argument in the paper is this: a considerable proportion of men desire same-sex attractions in women, and this is one possible reason why many women have such attractions," he said. The paper states about half of the men in the sample reported that they would become sexually excited if their opposite-sex partners revealed to them that they experienced same-sex attraction. Findings showed that 34.3% of male respondents would prefer a partner who is attracted predominantly to members of the opposite sex but occasionally of the same sex. The same answer was given by only 7.8% of women considered in the survey. The researchers argued that one of the reasons for men being attracted to women who experience same-sex attraction could be to increase their certainty of being the father of a potential child if their partner sleeps with someone else. The paper reads, quote, a woman driven by her sexual desires may seek sexual contact outside of her long-term intimate relationship. When this woman has sex with another woman, she does not have sex with another man, which translates into same-sex contact, reducing the risk of cuckoldry, close quote. The study also tried to analyze the differences between long and short-term relationships. In short-term relationships, about 30% of heterosexual men said they would occasionally want their partner to have sexual contact with members of the same sex. This number halved for men in long-term liaisons. The research naturally sparked controversy among the scientific community, but Apostolou insisted to Pink News that this is a solid argument. Diana Fleischman, a psychologist at the University of Portsmouth, told the International Business Times, quote, the paper totally ignores a lot of other possible hypotheses and makes claims that are really not supported by the evidence they provide. For example, the paper failed to account for the effects of porn on the male perception of lesbianism. Quote, I can't really see how cultural factors would make some men be turned on when their partners tell them I want to have sex with another woman, Apostolou said. These kinds of sexual traits are more instinctive. It's a mechanism that has been selected to preserve a purpose, to make you reproduce. Apostolou did recognize some of the limitations of his arguments and accepted that more research needs to be carried out if we are to understand the complexity of same-sex attractions. He told Pink News, quote, I believe also that there are additional factors that need to be taken in consideration if same-sex attraction in women is to be understood. The publication of my theory gives the opportunity for a fruitful academic dialogue where another scholar may attempt to refute, alter, or expand it and replicate my findings. I can't really take this seriously, you know. However, this article did trigger all the right people, so in that department it certainly does have a positive cultural value. From a scientific point of view, this is, at best, speculation. This is an argument I would have expected to hear in a YouTube video or some other places where wild speculation dressed up as evolutionary psychology are usually being made. But then again, it's the University of Nicosia, so they had to make themselves known through something. In any event, I would like to be a fly on the wall to witness the cognitive dissonance among the feminists or other leftists who might be inclined to agree with this article. Because if they agree with this, then it not only means that men are superior since they could shape the sexuality of the other sex without the reverse happening to the same extent, but they would also have to assume that lesbianism is bad in and of itself, which would be unprogressive. A tough one, for sure. In all seriousness, though, I am not convinced. And not because he didn't take porn into account. That's religious claptrap, religious leftist in this case. But because it takes a short look at present-day lesbians to reconsider the narrative of this quote-unquote scholar. I mean, I know he identifies himself as a scholar, but yeah, no. I mean, seriously, have you actually known lesbians? Because I have, and they're by far the most miserable women I have ever met, by quite a far margin. Show me a happy lesbian, show me a lesbian that isn't at war with the world and isn't mean-spirited as fuck, and usually fat, ugly, and generally unattractive as a human being, physically or as a personality, and usually both. I mean, I guess you could count Camille Paglia, but then again, she's a lesbian that hates lesbians and adores the penis. And again, she is at war with most of her world. But generally, lesbians are just not very nice people. So this scholar's hypothesis really has a problem. If lesbians emerged out of men's attraction to seeing women having sex with other women, then how did the lesbians also evolve into being the least attractive people on the planet? It just doesn't work that way. Anyway, it's a good laugh with this story for sure. Let's get to the next one. Coming from The Independent. Virtual reality pornography could raise issues about consent, researchers warn. Quote, the rising popularity of virtual reality pornography could cause a dangerous, blurred line between real life and fantasy, researchers have warned. Computer scientists at Newcastle University found that VR porn, where users can have an active part in a fantasy thanks to headsets, could make some of the more degrading and abusive elements found in some pornography seem more real, as they say in research presented at the Computing Machinery Conference 2017 in Denver, Colorado. The researcher used the story completion method, mainly targeting online writing communities, including fanfiction and Reddit forums. They culminated with 45 participant-generated stories. 24 were by men, 18 female, and 3 other. The majority, 30, were heterosexual, and 26 said they were not already users of VR porn. The participants were given an introductory sentence describing a man about to have his first experience of VR porn. They were then instructed to continue the rest of the story for around 10 minutes. While the results varied, what was present throughout was an apparent disjoint between virtual reality and real reality, and a negotiation of the barriers between them, the study noted. In one finding, they even suggested VR porn was akin to cheating on a partner because of the increasing reality. Other commonalities included themes of perfection, masculinity, heteronormativity, and some raised ethical questions. You know it's bullshit when it uses heteronormativity seriously. Anyway, researchers divided the story into 2 groups. The first was branded the perfect scenario, where participants described the perfect sexual experience. The second group was labeled precarious. Researchers' lead author Matthew Wood said the second group's stories often went beyond what would be acceptable in real life, with sometimes violent imagery featuring men performing degrading sexual acts on women or forcing themselves upon them. The authors also warned that VR porn could be used for revenge porn, saying it is not unforeseeable for a user to base a model on real-life people and then place them in pornographic scenarios. By the way, this has been possible for quite some time now, long before VR porn existed. But anyway, carry on. Dr. Madeline Balam, co-author of the research, said, quote, our research highlighted not only a drive for perfection, but also a crossover between reality and fantasy. Some of our findings highlighted the potential for creating 3D models of real-life people, raising questions over what consent means in VR experiences. If a user created a VR version of their real-life girlfriend, for example, would they do things to her that they knew she would refuse in the real world? The author said VR porn could provide an opportunity to influence pornography and introduce some new rules, saying the future of the experience could be more positive if it was designed right. In our research, we also saw suggestions that VR could deliver more embodied sensory experience with more emphasis on subtlety and the relational aspects of sexual experiences, Mr. Woods explained. Alright, so there is such thing called science, and then there is utter crap and drivel disguised as science. This is from the latter category, no doubt. I mean, look, every time something new emerges, some schmucks also do emerge, claiming that this is too real and therefore it's bad. These schmucks have been around for decades now, or even over 100 years. For instance, 100 years ago, the religious left and the religious right were united in banning porn magazines, using the same arguments that it's a form of cheating, that they're too real, yada yada yada, same bullcrap, different time period. Also, using their logic, if you see a nice lady or a nice man and then go home and rub one off thinking about that person and what you would do to and with that person should you be intimate. Using these researchers' logic, that would be a form of assault. Now that is of course lunacy. VR is what it says it is, virtual reality. Virtual being the operative word, meaning that it's not real, you pretentious schmucks. The same is true with your thoughts. Those are virtual reality too. If you have a wank thinking about someone, that is virtual reality, the old-fashioned way, but a form of VR nonetheless. So essentially these people are arguing for thought police, that thoughts are problematic and therefore need to be designed right. Presumably they have themselves in mind as the people who would do the designing right. And as I was saying, basing a model on a real person and putting it in pornographic situations has been done before. For instance, Larry Flint of Hustler Productions offered a reward for finding a woman that looks like Sarah Palin and was willing to do a porn movie. And he found her, and the movie was made. It was called Nailin' Palin, and it featured a Sarah Palin lookalike gangbanged by a bunch of Russian border patrol soldiers. The point was to mock her comments that she can see Russia from her home. Now nobody is laughing now, but at the time that was considered funny because reasons. Anyway, the point is that this isn't something new. Also, their argument that this is dangerous, that VR is dangerous because it's a crossover between reality and fantasy, welcome to art. I mean, any form of art, that is, and welcome to art in technology. Almost everything made with technology, not just porn, but also other forms of art such as video games, video design software, or even non-arty things such as general design software and other things. All of these are a crossover between reality and fantasy. And while both the religious left and the religious right argued harshly against video games and lost humiliatingly accordingly, the fact of the matter is that the crossover between reality and fantasy has been with us for many decades now, and the doom and gloom predictions didn't happen, as in at all. Seriously, this whole thing is just absolute insanity. If you don't like VR porn, then don't watch VR porn. It's not complicated, really. Call me when it becomes mandatory, then I'll gladly fight alongside you. Not because it's VR porn, but because anything mandatory tends to be cancer. Anyway, let's move to the next story. Also from Heat Street. BBC threatens to tell your boss if you post offensive comments online. Quote, the BBC has threatened to notify the boss of anyone who leaves content which it considers offensive on any of its websites. The latest version of the corporation's privacy policy includes sweeping powers to investigate users it doesn't like and report them to their employers. The extraordinary threat is buried in the middle of a 28-page privacy and cookies policy. All users are bound by this policy, though in reality the vast majority are unaware of it. The policy makes explicit that the BBC is willing to use your personal information to stop behavior which it deems disruptive and to punish users for posting content it thinks is offensive, inappropriate, or objectionable. Heat Street has asked the BBC's headquarters in London to further define these terms, which seem sufficiently broad to include almost anything to which the corporation objects. If officials decide a user's actions are sufficiently offensive that they could be against the law, they say they will use your personal information to inform relevant third parties such as your employers, school, email, internet provider, or law enforcement agencies about the content and your behavior. It seems reasonable that the BBC should be allowed to report potential criminals to the police. It is less clear what the aim of calling employees or schools could be, other than to get people in trouble without actually having to prove it by interacting with the criminal justice system. The phrases reasonably believes and may be in breach also give significant scope for the BBC to act in cases which are not ultimately illegal. This sort of wording is increasingly common in online privacy policies, and many similar examples can be found elsewhere. The BBC's policy is understood to have been included in previous documents, but only gained wide attention this week. Nonetheless, the threat has worrying connotations coming from a large and prominent publicly funded body which levies a tax from most of its population and is by far the UK's most prominent news source. The BBC's revenue comes mainly from the television license fee, which generates a tax-free sum of almost £4 billion per year. A BBC spokesman told the Heat Street, quote, "As the policy has stated for some time, where we believe that someone has posted something that may breach the law, we reserve the right to inform the relevant authorities. It's the responsible thing to do, just like most other organizations' policies allow them to share information." Now, please remind me again, why does the BBC still exist? I mean, if I understand it correctly, the British citizens are in the best position in Europe to avoid giving these thugs money. So why do people still give their hard-earned shekels, or pounds in this case, to this pile of garbage? Amazing. And the fact that they grant themselves such powers is not surprising at all. It's perfectly in line with the political tradition of most people in power in the UK. Totalitarian thugs. That's exactly what they are. I mean, really, what is there to say? Commenting on the BBC without a pseudonym and under a VPN is in itself stupid at this point. And I've seen many who are like, yeah, well, let them do it. My boss would give me a high five for pissing off the BBC, yada yada. Now that may indeed be so, but that's not the point. The point is that these statist thugs have granted themselves the power to attempt to make your life miserable without you having committed any crime, even by the stupid standards of the British law. Now that is a dangerous precedent that ought not to be tolerated. But then again, who cares about principles anymore, especially in Britain, where the populace is willing to tolerate levels of surveillance and state intrusion in the private lives of people that would make the East German Stasi nervous and envious. A population of sheep marching slowly to the slaughterhouse. Now please do prove me wrong. I'm still waiting. Anyway, last story for today. From the Telegraph, telling women not to drink during pregnancy is sexist. Advising women not to drink when pregnant is sexist and causes needless anxiety, senior academics have said. Pregnancy charities and researchers have called for a change to the alarmist official government guidelines which warn expected mothers to avoid alcohol completely. They say the policy has no basis in evidence and ends up stigmatizing women and excluding them from society. Studies have shown that consistent heavy drinking during pregnancy can result in fetal alcohol syndrome, which can cause physical, developmental, and learning difficulties. However, there is not robust evidence that light to moderate drinking or even one-off episodes of binge drinking causes any long-term damage. Experts at the University of Kent and the British Pregnancy Advisory Service are claiming that public policy towards pregnant women has gone down an overtly precautionary route, and that the government needs to be honest about the evidence. But last night, professional bodies defended the current position. Last year, the chief medical officer, Dame Sally Davies, was accused of scaremongering when she issued an updated formal advice on alcohol consumption for all adults, reducing the recommended weekly intake from 21 to 14 units for men and advising pregnant women not to touch alcohol at all. The previous guidelines had expecting women not to avoid alcohol, but noted that if they did choose to drink, they could not consume more than 2 units once or twice a week. Dr. Ellie Lee, director of the Center of Parenting Culture Studies and at the University of Kent, said the exclusion of women from an ordinary activity on the basis of a precaution was sexist. Public discourse has become very hostile, and there is now an assumption that a pregnant woman holding a glass of wine is doing something absolutely wrong, she said. Women are being accused, spoken to, and stared at in public. People assume that just because you've had one drink, you've had a whole bottle of vodka for breakfast. She said it was impossible to establish the safe level of exposure to alcohol during pregnancy. BPAS is also campaigning for a change in the tone of the advice on the basis that it may be needlessly scaring women into aborting pregnancies because of fear that a few heavy nights out will have caused the fetus serious harm. Claire Murphy, the organization's director of external affairs, said, quote, "There can be a real consequence to overstating evidence or simply certainty when there isn't any. Doing so can cause women needless anxiety and alarm, sometimes to the point that they considered ending an unplanned but not unwanted pregnancy because of fears that they have caused irreparable harm. But just as importantly, it assumes women cannot be trusted to understand the risk and, when it comes to alcohol, the difference between low and heavy consumption. The Department of Health refused to comment on the BPA's criticism. However, a spokesman for the Royal College of Midwives said it was best to avoid alcohol. This advice is not about policing pregnant women's behavior. It is about giving them unbiased information and enabling them to make the choice that is right for them, said Janet File, RCM Professional Policy Advisor. Alright, so this is a story that comes pretty much as a consequence, or even as a follow-up if you want, of what I was talking about last month in the video The False Civil Society, which I absolutely urge you to watch. Basically, as a result of a few single-issue fanatics, now everyone is under a highly radical policy based on flimsy evidence at best, and evidence resulted from advocacy research funded by minuscule but very vocal think tanks. Anti-alcohol prohibitionists in this case. But they go about it the wrong way. The issue is not sexism. I mean, come on, give me a fucking break. Everything is sexist these days. The issue is that guidelines and policies being shaped by single-issue fanatics with zero input from neutral individuals or from the society at large. Now that is indeed the issue, not sexism. Yes, it may indeed be sexist to tell women not to drink while pregnant, but that's because only women can get pregnant. You don't like it? Tough. Blame biology for us being a sexually dimorphic species. But once you go past the progressive bollocks, which really diminishes the value of this story overall, these people do have a point. Yes, fetal alcohol syndrome exists, and yes, it is better to avoid alcohol while pregnant in most situations, but no safe limits and total abstention as the norm? No. That's extremist, prohibitionist nonsense. A glass of wine every week or every other week can even have positive effects in some cases and definitely has no negative effects. There is no evidence for the negative effects from having a glass of wine once in a while being pregnant, even as prohibitionists spent tens of millions of pounds trying to find any evidence. There is none. And the prohibitionists' attempt to project a scientific consensus in the other direction by having their fanatics tweak the government guidelines won't change the fact that there is no evidence in that direction. The scientific consensus is that binge drinking while pregnant is a no-no, and that the first trimester is to be treated with much more caution than usual in this department. That's pretty much it. On everything else, there is no scientific consensus, just nanny state bollocks from single-issue fanatics. Theresa May's mother likely drank and smoked during pregnancy, and the mothers of most people alive today that were born between 1945 and 1990. This overly protective nanny state nonsense really does need to go. Now, with that said, this article still has bad arguments in it, such as the argument that the guidelines might, quote, cause women to consider ending an unplanned but not unwanted pregnancy because of fears that they have caused irreparable harm, unquote. Well, if a government guideline on alcohol is enough to convince you to kill your child, then the problem is with the individual woman more than it is with the guideline. And considering that Britain has the most extremist abortion law in Europe, allowing abortion up to 24 weeks into the pregnancy, the problem is also with the law. Now, halving that period to Denmark levels, to 12 weeks, that would do quite a lot in this department. But then again, that's sexist too, because heaven forbid someone actually thinking about children where it matters, rather than disdainful nonsense such as the dangers of the internet for children used as an excuse for censorship. So, the truth of the matter on this issue is somewhat more nuanced, and for goodness sake, it's time to get the balls necessary to tell women that the universe doesn't revolve around them, and that yes, there are issues that are a lot more important than their bloody feelings and anxieties. Atoning for the differences between the sexes may be sexist, but it's also healthy and good practice, especially on issues like this. We are not identical. Deal with it. And with that said, this concludes the 9th episode of this show. I hope you liked it, and hopefully I'll get to do another one before I go to Sweden. Again, sorry for the above average periods between the uploads, but balancing 10 commitments at once is not an easy job, and the channel is still a hobby for the most part, so it cannot go first or second in the priorities list all the time. Until I go to Sweden, the channel will have to stay 4th or 5th on my priorities list. And with all of that being said, thank you all once again for watching. Thank you for your continuous support. Please do consider pledging a shekel so I can move the channel higher on the priorities list. And I'll see you all around on Freedom Alternative.